Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode. I'm excited to be your host today and bring you some interesting interviews. And uh, Today, our guest is a medical doctor specialized in cancer and a LinkedIn top voice. In fact, he is one person in many. From being a cancer to an educator to a pilot, I'm sure his journey has been a mix of challenges and lessons. Our guest today is Dr. Hardeep Phull. Doctor, welcome to this fresh episode on Flying
Thank
Hub, and thank you for being with us today.
Wonderful to be here, Captain Khalid.
I would like to thank all our members who supported us through their feedback and comments on LinkedIn and the YouTube channel. Please keep feeding us back. Don't forget to subscribe to help us improve. Now, let's board the new journey and uncover more about Dr. Phull. What do you want to share with us first about Hardeep, Doctor?
Sure, and I'm so happy to be here. I think I connected with you on LinkedIn through this Flying Hub community because I've always been an aviation enthusiast, even before my passion for medicine or my career trajectory took off. In the back
Okay.
of my head, I always felt like I belonged in the air. From a kid, just flying on, airplanes, airlines, even. I took it like such a honor to sit in an airplane seat. I always used to think about how amazing it would be to be in the cockpit and fly. And we'll talk about that, how I got to achieve some of that. But I look up to people like you who do that day in, day out.
Thank you.
And it's interesting. You probably look up to me to be an oncologist. And, we all sort of, I wouldn't say envy, but we all sort of have such great talents and we all look towards each other for our gifts. It's an
True.
amazing thing.
Uh, and I would like to share the secret with you. I look up to you too because when I was in school, I actually wanted to be a doctor for many years. I couldn't make it. Um, and I remember when we were studying flying, we used to have this topic, it's, human performance limitation or HPL, and that was one of my favorite topics. So I was
Mm.
really doing good at doing good at it just because I wanted to be a doctor one day. That's very good. Thank you for that. Now I need your viewpoint on a statement that I wrote and I have to read. Pilots and doctors are held down by the same force of gravity, but both find ways to soar above it. The former relies on thrust and life, while the latter is propelled by sincere compassion and selfless service. Tell me
Mhm.
about this.
What's interesting is I got my pilot's license right before medical school. And what's interesting is if I hadn't taken some time off of college and joined a laboratory to do a little bit of research just to get some life experience, but also because it worked out that way. In my senior year of college, I studied abroad. And because of that, I had a delay in my application cycle. So
Okay.
I ended up taking a job in a laboratory at the hospital in Arizona. It ended up taking 3 years because I was so enthralled by it. But in that time, I said, here's your chance to go do other things besides medicine before you get committed. Because once a person is committed to the medical field and training starts, it's not like we don't have fun and get to do things, but
Yeah.
it's a committed trajectory now. And then maybe you could say there's not as much funding and money to do personal things. So I had that time, I had a little bit of money to save and to use. And I thought, what better way than to fly? And so that statement that I wrote there, that's actually directly from my, when you apply to medical school, you have to write about what you are as a person. And I wrote a lot about myself and my accomplishments, but that just the two sentences, I think there are 6 of them in a paragraph about flying. Um, if I can tell you what made me stand out compared to test scores or accomplishments, grades, that had more impact, at least on the people I talked with when I was interviewing for medical school and even after, than almost anything else, because it's such a profound statement that we're all held down by gravity, but we are all able to soar above it. And it's not just pilots and oncologists or doctors. You could say that about many industries or fields. Um, but I think it's amazing how, for example, when I started flying, I knew this would happen, but I didn't know till I got in the cockpit. And we're talking about flying Cessnas, small private aviation propeller aircraft, single engine, definitely not a jet. But I didn't realize, oh my gosh, I'm in 3 dimensions. When you're driving, you're really in 2 dimensions. You don't realize it, but you are. And you turn
Yes.
on the car and you drive. And even if there's heavy weather on the way or something else unexpected, you'll get there, more or less, whether it's dark, whether it's stormy. And I didn't realize, oh my gosh, in 3 dimensional space, when I have to control 3 axes, you can even call yaw another axis,
Yeah.
and then you have to adjust for the engine and the physics of it, which tries to promote you going to the left a little, so you have to put right rudder. I mean, these things, as soon as I got in the air and felt them, it just changed my view of how I think about how we fit in this universe and where we're going, and how it was joyful to me, even though it was challenging at first. One of the first thing a flight instructor teaches a young student pilot like I was is just maintain your altitude. How hard could that be? And I remember looking up the altimeter. I'm going up 100, 200, 300
Yeah.
feet down, up, then changing heading. You would say, oh, how hard is it to keep heading? Let's say 030, let's say, going north, northernly. Well, if you don't adjust with rudder and a little bit of aileron for the winds aloft, you will
Yeah.
be off course. And I didn't realize, oh my gosh, there's so many things I have to think about to keep it straight. It's not just like you turn it on and it just goes straight
Yeah.
in the air. It'll yaw to a side and so forth and drift. But what's amazing about that is once you master it and you get that, and I'm sitting kind of on a recliner, but one of the best advice that my flight instructor gave me, he said, listen, this is expensive. You're sitting in an airplane and you have only, let's say, 40 minutes of actual training time after you taxi and do all the checklists and land. That's not much. And you're paying me a lot. You're paying for the aircraft. You're paying for my hourly rate. I think it was like $40 an hour for the instructor and 120 for the aircraft, which in the early 2000s, that's probably like 200 now, 300 with inflation. And as a college student, who had some money, but, maybe not as much as that hobby requires. That's a very expensive hobby. And so
It is.
going back to the advice he gave me, he said, do couch flying. Pretend you're in the cockpit, sit on your couch, silence everything, see that cockpit in front of you, see everything going on. Think about your flight path, envision it, and it'll happen. And that's what I started doing. And I started predicting that. What if there's wind coming from that side? Where am I headed? What does it look like outside? What's my altitude? Where do I need to be? Where are the clearances? What are the frequencies? Um, who do I need to talk to now? What hazards are there? And I started doing that with a map in front of me and just envisioning it. And I can't tell you how, first of all, that's free. No one's paying me to sit on the couch. But what a profound way to learn, where you envision yourself in a situation, and it's so powerful. It translates to real life, so that when I got back into the training environment in the cockpit, I knew where the lever was, I knew where the thrust was, I knew where the flaps were, and I knew what I should be at, what altitude I should be at, and why I'm not, let's say. Um, so an incredible piece of advice, I would say, early on, I got from my instructor. I'm sure you do that. I hear you do a lot of training and simulation for the 787 Dreamliner. So I'm enthralled by that. Tell me about what you learn and what you teach people from that
No,
experience.
don't turn this on me. This is all about you now.
I know.
Okay.
I'm so enthralled by what you do.
What you said is actually is perfect, and the statement that I read actually is yours. And thank you for telling us the story behind it. And it's so profound. You are absolutely right. What is also profound is what you have just explained. And in aviation, this is the routine. Answering what if questions actually makes you more prepared for the unexpected events. although you cannot actually count them because they are unexpected to start with, and with the technology, especially modern aircrafts, with the complexity of the airplanes and the environment, these what if questions they come often, and you cannot actually prepare for everything that is unexpected. But this is how pilots think, and we are unlike you. You guys are smart doctors. You know,
I don't know about
if
that.
you graduate a med school, then you are actually smart. But for pilots, you do not really have to be smart. You just need to know um, the know-how. People who just can make it happen, and they know how to deal with these things. Then they excel in their work. Now, uh, so again, thank you for sharing with us the story behind all of this. Now, uh, being in medicine and aviation, uh, did you find anything in common?
So much in common, besides just the facts that you're using your hands, you're using your mind. I do think both are very cerebral. I think you downplay how much thought there is in being a pilot, being a good pilot. Let's say there are, the other passion of mine, people are surprised by this, but I watch a lot of, fortunately or unfortunately, I watch a lot of videos about aircraft accidents and incidents, and I read about it. And people say, why are you doing that? That's so morbid. You're just thinking about that when you're flying? And the answer is no, I'm not thinking about the worst that could happen. I like to learn from mistakes. And
So,
so I think a good pilot, by the way, is imperfect and will have made mistakes in their career. They don't have to be fatal ones. They could be tiny ones or small habits over time that could lead to a big one. So you have to
absolutely.
be incredibly reflective to say, why did that happen on that flight? What was the circumstances I was in? What was the software or hardware that could have been impacted? Um, what could I have done better? And I used to do that as a student pilot. And even after I got my formal pilot's license, I made mistakes, probably more than when I was
We
a
all do.
trainee. We all do them. And you could say, okay, it's better to make them on the ground. And yes, you can simulate a lot on the ground, of course, but you can't prepare for real life. Um, the other thing I think I learned the most from aviation that I apply even today is the fact that you have a surge of data coming from everywhere. And I used to, when you walk into an airplane, let's say a airliner, you look to the left, from the look at the cockpit, you look at the pilots preparing, the plane and for takeoff. You look at all their checklists, you look at all the dials and buttons and um, controls. You say, my gosh, these guys must be doing a million things at once. And it's actually not that complicated, but they have to know what each system does, make sure it's working, know what if one isn't working. And then in the middle of a situation, let's say, where they're
Yeah,
disoriented, and we would, again, simulate this in my training. I would wear goggles, not be able to see outside, only be able to look at my instruments. My instructor would put the aircraft in a very unusual position. It could be going, let's say, straight up and to the left, about to stall. And he said, all right, go ahead and fix that. And I didn't know where I was in space or time. I had no visual reference. I had the data, the evidence in front of me telling me exactly what to do. I'm in an upward pitch, turning 30 degrees to the left. My speed is decreasing. I need to pitch down, decrease, increase power, and level off. And you
yeah,
would say that's so easy in a very trained environment. When we get disoriented or when we get stressed, that's a very hard thing to do. Airliners, big fancy airliners with the latest GPS and instruments have gone down and killed everyone on board on nights where it was too dark or the pilot didn't think about terrain, the basics and fundamentals, and they got disoriented or they were stressed by the flight before. And so you asked earlier, how is that applied to medicine? And I say in so many ways, the amount of stress a physician is under, how much data you're inundated with sometimes. And so you have to say to yourself, let's filter the big data. Let's make it into what makes sense. Um, and hone down to what's going on and make a conclusion. So the idea of taking a surge of data, that's all at once. It could be communication from ATC, plus the instruments, plus something else going wrong, let's say, plus anxiety. and filtering that into a single useful thought, um, that's logical. That's a skill set that not many people have. And I think again, you underestimate, or you downplay how routinely you probably do that on a daily basis. And everyone should be doing that on a daily basis. It makes you more intelligent and logical and safe, by being reflective like that.
True. Exactly. Thank you. Thank you for
Hmm.
that. You just touch a point where aviation has crew resource management kind of training, which is mandated by the authorities. And what is in common now is actually the crew resource management. And I think medicine field took this from aviation, and they're applying it in the operations room, where you have to utilize all the available resources in order to achieve a certain mission. So yes, you're right. A lot of lessons should be learned from aviation and medicine to maybe by other domains. But now, at home, you are a pilot or a doctor. Are you confusing your kids?
I wouldn't say confusing my kids. In many ways, aviation's a past life for me. Once, like I told you earlier, if I hadn't taken that risk and done it at the time I did in my life when there was opportunity and time, I wouldn't have done it ever, because there's no perfect time, first of all. But once you have other priorities, by the time I had children with my wife, I was already in you know, the trenches of training, I would call, like the intern years, the training years of residency, which are the most intensive. You could say it's like, being a first officer, let's say. You're the second in command. You're never right. You're always being asked questions. You
Oh,
never quite competent. You're always second guessing. There's a lot of it. I see that in pilots too. A lot of, you could say, imposter syndrome, but also a lot of grit, saying, I got to work hard. I got to get there. I got to get this many hours. I got to make captain. Um, so during those training years, it's like, I got, even though you're a doctor after medical school, you have to now earn the credentials to be a special type of doctor and to get your certification in a field and start your first job. And that was, let's say, 7 more years beyond medical school for me. So people don't know this, but I haven't flown since right after medical school, because it's, first of all, too expensive, too much time, too many other competing priorities. Um, and I really think, even if I had done it, I would have had to relearn so much, because every new place you go, you have to learn that airspace. It's very unique. I'm on the coast now in California, a very unique airspace that I was never in before. I've flown
mm,
in Cleveland, Ohio, during the summers when it's clear, and also in Arizona. It's like the desert, almost like
yeah,
100% visibility. The biggest danger there is terrain, or not realizing the weather is about to close in on you and you have a thunderstorm. And I've been in a pickle before, and we can talk about that, where I learned a lot of lessons. But my point being, if I were to do it now, I'd have to relearn an entirely new airspace. And I think it's safe. I tell people aviation's the safest form of travel if you do it in a controlled way. You're not using it to showboat or get somewhere without logic. Let's say if you use it as your primary mode of transport, it's not like a car where you turn on and off and pull off on the side of the road. One of the Another lessons I learned is the best decision you can make is when not to go. And
exactly.
so, um, you know, sometimes airlines even have to make that decision, or make diversions, especially in private aviation. Um, especially when we're on the coast, the weather can close in on you. The fog layers and the marine layers can be suddenly clear and looking at the ocean, and then suddenly you're in uh, IFR conditions. And by the way, I was visual rules only. I was VFR. I never got instrument rated, but I would love to do it one day. But I've even seen instrument rated pilots go into unclear conditions unexpectedly, not handle it well, and do a very fundamental mistake, which cost their lives and, of course, the aircraft. So it's not that I'm fearful of all that. And you mentioned my kids, and I tell them aviation's wonderful. I teach them, even when we're flying on vacations, that this is normal and that noise is normal. This turbulence, it's going to be okay. When we're landing, I tell them this is what's going on right now up there, and this is why we're turning. And there's a huge line of aircraft, and you have to space yourself. And I have a great joy in telling them that. And I don't think they truly realize, what I did and what it's about, like in the cockpit. But I want them to be not fearful of flying ever, and to,
Beautiful.
if they wanted to pursue aviation, do it by all means. Because a lot of
So
people now, even
so,
people, are.
sorry, are you saying we have a doctor or a pilot in the family, or both?
I think as a doctor who used to be a pilot.
Um, so, so those are the lessons that at least you are passing to your kids from both domains.
And
Um,
I think I will start up again. I just think I have to settle down and then retrain. I think the next step for me would be do instrument training. And, I think it's 10 to 15 hours, but to be honest, to get back into it in a new airspace, it's probably 20 to 30 more hours of training
yeah.
to get that. And again, it's not about the rating. It's going to be knowing when to use that and when not to. Like the biggest
Mm,
mistake I've seen doctors make, and this happens every year, physicians use private aviation. They buy an aircraft. It could be maybe too much aircraft for them, and they use it to commute to, let's say, remote jobs, to go to rural areas, or fly
yeah.
back and forth to exciting destinations. The problem with that is you can plan out a trip, have a hotel ready, have everything prepared, but something goes in your way. It could be a storm, it could be problems with the aircraft. That aircraft should not be flying. It needs maintenance, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And you go despite that because there's so much on the line. You have to be somewhere. You have to show up, or you cancel it. Or in the case of a job, you're actually harming patients if you don't go. And so that sounds so exciting. Oh, I'll fly to my job. Oh, I'll fly back. There's so many variables in between, and the job itself is so stressful that in your mindset, if you're using that as a commute, I would almost say that's dangerous and destined to cause problems unless you have tons of backups, including a car as a backup. Um,
Yeah.
so again, I expect to do it again in my life, but probably not as a daily thing to and from work. It would be mostly pleasure. And the key for me, again, will be telling myself, when do you not go? It doesn't matter if you have to do a cancellation of a hotel reservation, even if they charge you money. Your life is more valuable, right? These are the lessons. They're fundamental, and we all know them. But this phenomenon called get there-itis.
But
That's one of the first
yet,
things I taught in flight
uh,
school.
isn't it a human nature that uh, you have less people who can say no than people who say yes? So isn't that kind of our nature, isn't it?
It certainly is, and it's forgiving when you're in two dimensions on the ground. It
Yeah.
doesn't work with aviation. And I mean, I'm sure even professional pilots make mistakes like that,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
companies make mistakes with maintenance and things like that, when planes should not be flying. But, I've been very fortunate. I've been in planes where they had to make emergency landings. And of course, everyone's freaking out. And the first thing I'm saying to people next to me is, this is good. They recognized a problem. They're reacting to it. They could have
Yeah.
very easily ignored it. They could have just told you, don't worry, sit back and relax.
Yeah.
The ones who are overconfident and don't do that emergency landing, those are the ones who are going to cause problems one day. Um,
Sure.
so I love, when I was flying to India growing up, my favorite airline was Singapore Airlines, because that went from Los Angeles to usually Singapore, then to Delhi. I used to just love that flight. I loved that airline. I remember being stranded even as a young kid in Singapore, and who cares? You're stranded. You get to have a great time in Singapore. But I still remember to this day. I even saved it when our plane on the way back had a little dent on the cargo door, and we're boarding the plane, and now everyone kicks us off and says, "There's a problem with the aircraft. We'll let you know." And everyone's provided with a memo that explained how the cargo door was dented, and it had a Singapore Airlines logo and a signature from the president. And I saved
Wow.
that like it was like an autograph. And I said, wow,
Yeah.
they wrote me a letter and explained what was going on. And I remember the gate agent even met with me and said, it's always better to fly with a safe aircraft. And
Sure.
back then Singapore Airlines had this the best safety record. They still do, except for I think one incident when they landed in rain and had a runway incursion. But still one of the safest airlines. And I just remember the safety culture and how seriously they took it and how impeccable those planes were, how good the service was, but also how safe I felt.
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
always talk about.
you're right. A lot of passengers they get mad if their aircraft is held technical because of any technical defect, and and I don't blame them because emotionally uh, maybe they wanted to catch another flight, and maybe they have somebody else who's waiting for them on the other side, and other number of passengers like you described it, they feel happier to have a better and safer airplane, more healthier airplane than just take off and then come back again or divert somewhere else where nobody can take care of you. So we have passengers around this all over the world. Um, yeah, this is one way of thinking about it. It's better to avoid a problem rather than trapping it.
Mhm.
That is the lessons in aviation. We have these three stages: avoid, and then trap, and then mitigate. So
Mhm.
if you know it, it's better to avoid it. If you are in it, you should be competent enough to trap it and well trained as well to mitigate it if something gets worse. So that's fantastic. If you go back on time and let's say you can afford both, would it be medicine or aviation?
To be honest, I think it would still be medicine. And, medicine provides so much lifelong satisfaction from learning, from helping others. Um, there's a lot of similarities, even in times when you give bad news to people. Let's say you tell them your plane is broken and you need a new plane and you may have a delay and you have to stay overnight. Same thing happens in, let's say, cancer care. There's an unexpected finding. Things didn't go as expected. And now your life is on the line, possibly, right? And so there is bad news in both. That's common. How you deal with it is what matters. The gate agent who told me it'll be okay and it's safe and this is better and gave it with such warmth and hospitality is the same way a doctor should treat people. That could be your father, your brother, your son,
Absolutely.
daughter, mother. Hospitality, warmness. No human soul deserves to suffer or to get unexpected news. It's a natural reaction to be upset. It's a natural reaction for even clients in medicine. Airports themselves, just break down people. They're meant to do that. Sorry, they're meant to stress people out in a way. The environment is not very soothing and relaxing. And people are working on that to make the airports cleaner and even have music and scents and other amenities to naturally calm people. But going through security, waiting in line, getting up super early, people are on their the highest stress levels when they're flying sometimes. So the same thing happens in medicine. People haven't slept. They're scared. They've been crying. They're uh, bitter, and they may take anger out on the doctor, and they're not meaning to. Just like
Mm.
I wouldn't be meaning to treat a gate agent or a pilot disrespectfully, but in my head I'm saying, "Come on, couldn't you have just flown it? It would have been fine." You know.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
expectations are important, but customer
Cool.
service is king. I've followed a few pilots on LinkedIn, in fact, captains, I think, of different big airlines. They just show some of their emotional intelligence and their techniques to calm the passengers, including talking to them at the gate and then telling jokes even when as they're boarding or introducing themselves and shaking your hand as you're coming in. Those little things go so far. They're human, and it's in any customer service industry or hospitality industry. I've always felt the most calm and reassured when I had that. So I say, why don't I do that same thing then? Provide hospitality, make people feel warm and welcome.
Brilliant. Very good. Okay, why cancer? What challenges is facing the cancer care?
People don't know this, but my mother was a nurse she was actually a teacher at a prestigious boarding school in India. But then when we moved to America, she found teaching wasn't the same. It wasn't the same caliber. I wasn't taking in the same prestige, especially at the pre-college level. So she went back to school and chose nursing. Um, and I was probably 12 years old at the time. And so I would go with her on some of her rotations and clinics and just kind of volunteer there, get some experience. And that turned into a wonderful experience. She ended up choosing cancer care because she also found a passion in taking care of cancer patients. And she rotated through all different things. But I even noticed that she was happiest when she helped treat cancer patients. And so I would spend entire summers volunteering at the hospital, at the
Wow.
cancer ward, talking to people who were getting their treatments, who were seeing the doctor, or who were just there for something else that was not, um, let's say, life threatening. And I got to see the full gamut of it. I got to see um, the triumphs of it, and also some of the sadness. There is death and dying as well, unfortunately, and unexpected findings, and the importance of compassion um, and humility in knowing that what could happen to you, you know. But I found just tremendous joy in hearing patients' stories, um, seeing them win on their own terms, even if the outcome was death. Um, Seeing them endure a treatment journey with grace, and just being part of that. And to me, I was just a high school student at that point, and for someone to share their life with me and talk to me and share personal details, um, I just felt that was such a privilege. Like, I'm just a student, and you're telling me such amazing things, sharing your wisdom. Um, it felt like a two-way street, that I was learning just as much as they were, that being a physician and being a cancer doctor is not just about giving out what I have to offer. It's also taking in what people on their journeys and their life, their experiences have to offer and what they give to you. And I may sound selfish, but I feel like I gain so much more than what I give out. Um, Although patients would probably say the opposite, you know. But um, it is a very fulfilling field. I couldn't imagine doing anything else. Um, in medical school, I did try to do surgical subspecialties, mostly because I thought I'm good with my hands. I fly.
Mm.
I should be a surgeon. And it's nothing, I could have still become a surgeon. I think in the end, I realized my passions were full circle coming back to what I prepared myself with, which was um, all the skills required to be a good cancer doctor. Um, and I was lucky to be in a hospital setting and school where mentorship was key, and making mistakes was okay, and even changing your trajectory. I changed very late, by the way, in my medical school training to choose cancer care. People don't realize, oh, that's a big deal. When you're prepared your whole life to do one thing, and you've, let's say, padded your resume and done all those experiences, written papers on one thing, hoping to be that thing, and then suddenly change courses, it'd be like, taking your 787 type rating and now saying, oh, I got to change my rating to a different plane because I'm going to be flying something else now. And that's a big deal. It's a big deal. But I'm so glad I made it back then, because it's hard when people get into their final training course and residency and fellowships. It's hard to go back after that. And we do see that people quit halfway through or afterwards and say, this is not for me. I'm going to go back and do something else, which is fine. You learn a lot. But what a privilege I had to have mentors who found that passion in me and found that skill set and said, I actually had someone who told me, you would be a great surgeon. You'd be a way better internal medicine doctor, honestly. And what a great piece of feedback. That person did not have to say that to me. They could have just said, you're doing great.
Yeah,
So,
true.
the power of mentorship, that happens in the cockpit too, as you know. A good mentor can teach you so much.
You're absolutely right. And but you are giving now. You said you've been selfish. You don't know what you've been given. And I would like to highlight the podcast that you recently had about well-being. So thank you for that, and we will put that as in the description of this episode to share it with people, and I encourage people to watch that episode as well. Hardeep, I would like to ask you to share with us something that no one knows,
Okay.
exclusive for Flying Hub.
Sure. Gosh, I have to be careful. Hopefully I say nothing confidential. No. I was
You have
thinking
the right
about
to remain silent, so if you don't want to answer this question,
It's
I
fine.
understand.
It's fine. I mean, we all have such unique journeys and things that happen to us, whether they're funny or tragic. I like to think of every experience as meaningful. And since we're talking about flying, I'll talk about flying. If my flight instructor found out about this, he'd probably say, "Why didn't you tell me that?" But when you first get your when I first got my pilot's license, I felt amazing. I felt like invincible, and that's a scary term to use because I've told you everything to the opposite. That don't ever
Ego,
be
overconfidence.
yeah, overconfidence. Um, I passed my check ride, and that's a big deal. That I've had many exams in my life, even oral exams, but to be in with a FAA and uh, check ride and investigator who's sitting next to you in the passenger seat is no longer your flight instructor.
Yeah,
And they're asking you to do things. You're wondering if you're doing it right, and um, to pass that is just so amazing. It feels like, wow, I did it. I've done something amazing, and I have this license now that's a government official license that's hard to earn, that very few people have. You know, um, I still remember uh, I did a fairly good job, though my when we you have to do stall training, and of course in your check ride you have to show them that you can handle any sort of power on, power off stall. Um, and perform certain parameters with very little error. And my plane kept stalling to the right and almost going into spins each time. And I had flown this aircraft my entire training, and I was very comfortable with it. It was an older Cessna 172. I think it was the 1961. It was a mint green. And
wow.
it just brought me so much comfort, even though it was old and kind of not so beautiful looking. I knew its characteristics. I knew how it performed. I knew exactly when it was about to give out, except on that check ride day. For whatever reason, no matter how much rudder I would put in and compensate, and I did power on stalls, it would just jolt to the left and nearly go into a spin and cause a very stressful recovery. And of course, I recovered each time and got it back to altitude. But then the investigator looked at me, to the side, and he said, "Let me try one." And I said, "Oh no, what is he going to do?" So he just wanted to see what was wrong with the airplane, or if that's just the airplane. And he did a
Yeah,
power on stall, and the same thing happened to him. And I said, "Oh,
okay.
thank God, I didn't do something wrong." But it's probably something with the flight characteristics of that specific aircraft. And it was safe. It wasn't unsafe. It's just it tended to uh, yaw to the right on a power on stall. But I remember, okay, I got through that. That was very stressful. And he told me I'm doing fine. And then I did my final set of landings and nailed them. He even told me, perfect landing. So I said, wow, I'm doing it. I landed center line and, with crosswinds and everything. But the mistake I made at the very end now, I'm done. I've communicated with ground control. I've crossed the runways, going over to parking. Again, even when you're parking or riding on the taxiway, always show that you're looking outside the cockpit and thinking about what could be happening, what other aircraft on the ramp or wind and so forth. So I'm again in hyper acute mode, looking for anything that he could dock me on, so I don't fail
Yeah,
this expensive check ride. Because it is expensive, by the way. And if
good.
you fail, you do it again. But so I finally get to the final parking. I park it perfectly, turn off the engine, do all the post checklists, and then I go to basically you have to dock the plane, and you put the chains on the areas
Yeah,
of the wing to make sure, of course, that it's properly tethered to the ground. And interestingly enough, I did not prepare well for that. I was in a different parking spot than usual, and I didn't realize it, but mostly my instructor would be doing that stuff for me, and I would be
mm,
focusing on other stuff. And such a simple thing, right? You can fly this plane, you can land it, you can stall it, you know how to do all these skills and techniques you've learned, but a simple thing as tying down your aircraft so that the wind doesn't take it away, or so it doesn't
yeah.
move or drift
Housekeeping
away.
stuff.
I did it wrong. I was way too loose on the chains. I knew where they were, of course. It's not like I haven't done it before. But I remember him going to my instructor afterwards and saying, I overheard it. He said, your guy did a great job. Got to really teach him how to tether that airplane down. He's going to have a plane fly off on him if there's severe wind. Um,
Right.
so he, so that's a story that not many people know. My instructor knows it, But the corollary to that story is, that was very early on. But as I got my license and started flying to other airports that I'd never been to, that my instructor had never taken me to, again, I prepare as if it's a brand new flight that I've never done, and I do the homework. But there was one field in particular that I'd never landed at. That was a smaller, unregulated airport, and it was maybe 2,000 feet in length. And I'm used to, I flew at an international airport with an 11,000-foot runway. And though I don't use the 11,000 feet, it's nice to know that I had it. I used like 1,000 of it. But when you have 2,000 feet and you're not used to that, and that's the first time you're see the end of it, you're like,
Yes.
ooh, I don't have much space for error. So I was landing in this private field by myself, the first time ever, shortly after that check ride on my own. And the mistake I made is I could have stopped. I just decided, oh, I'm running out of runway, I shouldn't stop. So I powered on and did a go around, and I had full flaps in. And this is a fundamental error, one that you should not make, because it's been trained into you not to do this. But I, saw the end of the runway coming. I full power, I pitched up, but I'm like, I'm not going up fast enough. There's bushes and trees at the end of the runway. I just dropped my flaps from 40 to 0. And my gosh, I remember looking at those tops of those shrubs and trees, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm like 2 feet above it. I could have easily have hit that. And luckily, I had plenty of power, and I'd installed the airplane or land. And it would have been a small, it wouldn't have probably damaged the aircraft that much, but it would have definitely been a crash landing into past the runway. But it was flat surface. It wouldn't have been deadly, but I would probably mangled up the airplane, and what a bad thing it would have been to do. But I remember thinking that day, gosh, how could you forget a fundamental error? Drop your flap. You're supposed to get a positive rate, get past that, and then go to 30. Get another positive rate, go to 20, 10, 0. And so, yeah, little errors like that you make, which could cause even life-threatening,
Dr. Hardeep Phull, thank you very much for being with us. I know you have to catch something now, and thank you for being so early. There is 11 hours difference between us, so thank you for your time, and thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. It's wonderful. Thanks, Captain Khalid. I wish you all the success in the world with your wonderful podcast.
Thank you very much. You too.